Welcome to the Good Growth Podcast, brought to you by BGF. We're an active equity investor in the UK and Ireland. This week, Jimmy is joined by Simon Steward, Head of Digital at BGF. Simon explains his role supporting portfolio management teams in their digital transformation journeys. He shares the common challenges faced by businesses when upscaling their tech stack, how BGF can help in leveraging partnerships with technology vendors, and the value of knowledge sharing among the BGF community.
So Simon, welcome. Explain what your role is at BGF.
So I'm in the portfolio team, in the value creation team within the portfolio team. And my role is to work with management teams in the portfolio, helping them identify the technology value creation levers that they should be pulling and helping them with their strategy, identifying gaps where we can help them build capability and maturity to maximize the value of their business through technology.
Okay, and what does value mean in this instance?
I guess it means exploiting technologies to enable the business to move more quickly, make more money, and impact the enterprise value of the business. There are, because we see 380 or so portfolio companies, we have a very good idea of what good looks like, how companies should benchmark and where the gaps are, and we can help them work out what they should be doing in order to be benchmarking well against the portfolio and the market in general.
And what are the sort of common traits that you see amongst the 380 portfolio companies in terms of the challenges they face when it comes to the digital side of the business?
The three main areas until recently have been digital transformation. So investments are often taken in order to make the back-end system and the sort of digital infrastructure of the business much more mature and more enterprise-like and moving out of startup mode. Data and data infrastructure. So companies are truly data-led and they have the insight and the management information and the data in order to steer those businesses in a data-led way. And then cyber is another main area that we can help with. So those have been the three areas. But then last year, of course, AI just on the scene, and then that's a big issue, and companies would like to know about AI and what they should be doing.
So let's say we'll definitely come on to AI because I want to talk to you about sort of all the future technology trends because I think your role is such an interesting one. But come to us with that. Why BGF have made an investment over the last few years, that updating of the business, updating the technology stack, digital stack that sits behind a company. Mm-hmm. And I suppose that, for a family business or something that's been run for 20 or 30 years, that's clearly got traction, must be quite sort of daunting to think, okay, well, how do we make the right steps into doing this? And is that where you guys sort of come in and be like, we've helped hundreds of companies literally with this? Is that how you sort of do that part of the job?
Yeah, exactly. If you're a company and you've got your head down, you're running that business, you're focused on what you need to run that business well. It's unlikely that you're going to have enough time to be surveying the market, reading blog posts, listening to podcasts, and understanding all of the options you might have, and there will be many. The route or path or strategy you can take to a digital transformation and updating your business. But we've done that many times, and we can help a company, help them choose the right direction and who they might work with. And we work with all of the tier one providers, ERP, for example, Microsoft, NetSuite. We have arrangements with them. Those big vendors treat BGF in aggregate, and you think of us as a £3 billion enterprise, and portfolio companies are able then to benefit from that, so that they can get a level of service, a level of access to subject matter experts, discounts, and other support from those vendors that they wouldn't get as an SME. And then there is the network of implementation partners that those vendors have, and we know good ones, and something that's very strong and incredibly powerful in the BGF portfolio is that portfolio companies are very happy and pleased to help other portfolio companies. So there's, as a potential sort of new BGF portfolio company, there will be any number of senior management teams from portfolio companies who are, that one step ahead of you, and they can talk you through the pros and cons, the warts and all view of, the project or transformation that they've been on.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly powerful. And management teams always surprise me at how generous they are with that.
And how do you keep pace of all the changes that are taking place there, right? Because that's actually a very good example of, like, there's lots of case studies that are known out there for companies that did this 10 years ago and have been mega successes. It's actually much more difficult to find somebody who is that 1-2 steps ahead of you in the process. How do you kind of keep on top of everything that's happening in this space?
Well, there's 380 businesses. Obviously, I can't be talking to those all of the time, but that gives me a huge set of companies to draw on. And the businesses I talk to know that I want to hear of things that have worked really well, suppliers, individuals, companies that they're working with that have really created value. When I find those, then I add that to my sort of black book of interesting business that I can connect other portfolio companies to. And I'll also actively cross-pollinate that. If I find a business that's providing an amazing service into e-commerce businesses, we have many e-commerce businesses, I shall make sure I've let them know of that case. So case studies for me are really just knowing the headlines and having someone at that company who's prepared to talk to another portfolio company. So I'm not producing sort of polished PDFs of these things, but I just know that case and can connect other businesses and cross-pollinate. So that sort of visibility of what's going on across the portfolio keeps me up to date.
Yeah.
So my conversations are either, I'm learning something from my conversation, or I'm sort of imparting that in a subsequent conversation.
Yeah, and I can see the value creation much more that you talked about in the sort of first answer and so on. What are the kind of risks and potential impacts that are available for portfolio companies that are approaching a kind of digital transformation and thinking about it?
Well, it's a notoriously complex thing to do because it's the nervous system of the organization, and you're swapping that out whilst the business is still operating.
Yeah.
It's like servicing your car whilst you're driving it, isn't it? It's incredibly complex to do. And it really comes down to having someone who knows what they're doing to run that. So I will often advise businesses to bring in an external transformation expert to run that project for them. And the rigor that you need there is to understand exactly what the business does, mapping and understanding all of the processes that a business carries out, and then rigorously interviewing and auditioning the potential vendors, and then being objective with your scoring matrices and coming to a view as to which is the best vendor to go with, and then being able to negotiate that and to arrange the implementation phase and to be able to carry that out in a series of low risk steps. The thing to do is to break it down into a series of probably reversible low risk steps. And that's the sort of hardware and process side. But it's 50% or more a soft issue. You need committed leadership championing this and explaining why it's a good idea, and also to just keep the staff and everyone in the business motivated and to get over the line. And the thing that's often misunderstood is that the day the new software goes live is really, everyone's job's got twice as hard because you're doing the old way and the new way.
Yeah.
And it's blended because you're doing some of the old and some of the new, and you've got to be able to run both of those systems until the sort of water goes clear through that, and you've really delivered the value at the end. And that's a motivation and sort of team management and soft issue, really.
And how do you get that buy-in? I mean, I appreciate that's not necessarily your sort of direct job on the investor side, but you've seen a lot of these cases. How do you get teams to buy into that and achieve it?
It's just clarity of the vision that you're communicating of why it's going to be better. And it almost always is going to be better because companies have systems that evolve that may have lots of spreadsheets, lots of manual processes, there's lots of double keying, there's lots of errors. It may take weeks or a huge amount of time.
What do you mean by double keying?
So you're entering stuff in one system and then you're entering it in another system. You've got to keep them in sync. These things, there's not much automation. So a modern web-based, fully featured ERP can solve a lot of those problems and to kind of save a huge amount of time.
What's ERP?
Sorry, an enterprise resource planning. It's sort of essentially a finance system, but with lots of bells and whistles on that.
And what do you think the big sort of digital technology trends on the horizon are? I mean, obviously the sort of dominant one is AI.
Yeah,
so maybe let's talk about that.
That's really all you need to think about. That's going to infuse everything we do. It's already rolling out now across Microsoft 365, these with
Copilot,
Copilot, which is extraordinary, the things it can do. But
give us some of the examples of things it can do.
I think the most valuable and powerful and sort of feature right now with Microsoft 365 is just being able to summarize a large document. You can load it into Word and just ask arbitrary questions of that document.
Yeah.
Which is like having the author there to answer the questions. But not only that, it will summarize it for you and point to various bits when it's got a cross-reference and highlight the figures in the table that gives it that answer.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly powerful. And really that's just scratching the surface of the capability.
And where do you see it in the future, right? Like, because often with a lot of this stuff, we talked about sort of how to update the old stacks and so on, but what about like in terms of trying to skate to where the puck is going, right? Like what do you see we're heading towards in 5 years' time? How can companies be preparing themselves now?
Well, I think you're going to get a massive amount of disruption, and there's sort of one view of AI where it's really just a sort of a very cheap resource that can do most of someone's job. That's $20, $25 a day. But I think that's sort of missing the amount of disruption. It's not simply swapping out, people in call centers or people who are simply processing and organizing data, taking unstructured data and putting that in a spreadsheet for their boss or whatever. I think what you'll get is a fundamental change in the way in which businesses or whole sectors operate. I think the best analogy really is the sort of cottage industry to industrialization. Let's say you have sort of textiles, which used to be a set of people who were somewhat more skilled than average, who were spinning wool and weaving textiles, who were organized by someone who go around and kind of give out the jobs and collect the output. And that migrated over time to, the industrial production of textiles. And you ended up with a situation where that world, it led to a situation where there was industries that were doing the casting of the machines, and then it had people who were running the staffing and the rotors, and it led to kind of financing and people who are financing those factories and people who are sort of dealing with the accounts and what have you. But the end result of that was that textiles were created, but no one was doing the jobs that they did previously. And there was a whole industry and ecosystem that spun up, So each of those people had a facet of their role that was, generating textiles, but it was nothing like the previous example.
Yeah.
And that transformation that happened over a couple of 100 years will go through industries, I think, in a few years.
Yeah.
And things that we used to do that were sort of bits of human activity that were whole jobs will just disappear, I think. You're seeing AI writing articles and blog posts and creating clickbait to drive traffic to publishers or what have you. And then you're seeing people's sort of personal agents who are reading these things and advising them on what to buy and whatever. But if the machines are writing it and the machines are reading it, that's sort of folding in beneath the surface of human activity, and something else will happen on the top, which I'm not entirely sure what that is. But certain industries, I think, like health, for example, education, travel, will be disrupted fundamentally and very quickly. And it's not that they will just be delivering the same type of thing that they were before in it with machines, but a whole different shape industry and sets of endeavours.
How do you think travel will be disrupted then?
I think you're going to get a sort of, travel used to be that you'd flick through the yellow pages, or you go to the travel agent on the high street and you'd talk to someone about the holiday you'd want, and they would listen to that, give you some options, and you'd decide on what you wanted in a much more conversational kind of way. And then the internet and the problems with that is that you wouldn't know whether you're getting the best price, and you wouldn't know whether you got the choice of the whole market. Yeah. But someone did that for you, and they carried that out on your behalf, and there wasn't much work for you to do other than to express what you wanted and to say whether the options you were given were satisfactory or not. But then, the internet over time has led to a situation where we're doing all the work. Yeah. It's quite hard work. If you book a holiday, you've got many, many tabs open. Yeah. It's quite brittle if you change the date or someone's not coming or whatever, the whole thing collapses, you've got to start again. Yeah. And it's hard work, but you are getting a full view of the market, and you do know that you're getting probably the best price. But I think you'll very quickly will get to a situation where you'll have a FaceTime like call to a service, and you will just talk to about what you want. It'll make suggestions. You'll be sure that you get a full view of the market. But you will have loads of flexibility to, well, what if this person joins us there and they're just on the return flight, or what if we go at this date, or whatever. And you'll have that taken care of for you by something that looks a lot like a travel agent.
It's almost going back to an old model then.
It is, but with the advantages of both. But the key advantage for the consumer is that you're not having to wrangle hundreds of tabs and spend a week trying to get everything over the line and booked.
That's with all of these. Can we fly the day before or the day after? Or...
Massively interdependent parts. So I can see the primary interface for many businesses, retail type consumer businesses, being something that looks just like a person. Yeah.
What other sort of major trends do you kind of see coming up that AI will sort of have a disruptive force on it? I mean, we've talked about health in a few other episodes and so on.
Health is a massive.
Health is a massive one, which I think kind of people get. But what else can you sort of see?
I think education will be a massive one as well. Yeah. I mean, AI means that everyone is a career switcher, and sort of the much talked about total life learning is not going to be something that the most progressive and motivated people do. It's something that everyone has to do because your job is fundamentally changing. Yeah. It's changing very quickly and will continue to change very quickly for some time until the sort of the massive convulsions and structural change that AI drives settles down. And so everyone is going to need to be sharpening their skills and learning new things. And I think AI is going to be brilliant at doing that because it's going to be able to give you exactly the lesson you need, and it's going to be tuned to you, and it's not going to lose its patience. It's going to be able to, work when you want to work. It's just going to be there for you. And I think that the whole kind of approach to learning, which in a corporate environment, you would, your boss has decided that you need to learn something. You'll go on a course. You'll go out of your work context. Yeah. You'll learn that somewhat like a classroom environment that you did at school or university, then you'll come back to work. And I think that whole model will break down, I think. I think what you'll have is an AI that's watching you. It can be sort of like an educational fairy godmother. It's noticing that maybe you're struggling or there's something that you're not doing or you're not aware of, or it's, so in this context, this is a useful thing to extend your skills. It'll, do some learning probably in line in what you're doing. It can use examples and content and material from your firm's database, in this deal or in this situation, or, your boss did this, so that it will almost be sort of just woven into your job. And then you can say, well, the whole purpose of training is to make sure that a firm has the people who are correctly skilled for this role. And so you train them up and then they go and work in that role. But really what you could be doing is the AI could be matching people to those roles, or, where you have a gap come up, it would know exactly who is most suitable. Imagine a firm of thousands of people, and so that sort of higher level generic kind of aspect of training, which is making sure that you have the people appropriately skilled for certain roles, the AI can deal with that, and that kind of totally changes the nature of training, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And education, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to go like that, but that's just an example of how that fundamentally changes the structure of the previous example. It's still training and education, but it can operate at a very different level.
Difference, yeah. And what else are you sort of like getting companies to sort of think about, and what excites you that you see in the market at the moment?
Well, I guess the exciting thing is just the rate of change and the potential. And so it's for senior management teams, it's important to be aware that it's you've got a huge amount of potential, but the threats and opportunities are massive and almost equally balanced. It's not that necessarily what's the threat to your business, but what's the threat to your entire sector.
Yeah.
Or what's the opportunity for you to do something transformational? I mean, there's a business that I work with and sort of been involved with it for some time, that because they are on the front foot with AI, their customers are coming to them to solve a completely different problem that they've been very good and adept at solving for them, that then opens up a whole new world that, perhaps 6 months ago they wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah.
And then just from that leads to something else and something else, something else. And so the opportunity and disruption is massive. And so that's exciting in the same way that sort of mid-late 90s internet was exciting.
Yeah.
It feels a lot like that. And the hype cycles and what people are saying and the overhyping of things and sort of all of the futurologists feels a lot like the late 90s. And whilst that played out over 20, 25 years, I think this is going to be, 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah.
And so, that was exciting. This is going to be many times more intense and just as exciting, I think.
Yes, and slightly daunting as well. What else do you sort of chat to people about? I mean, you were saying beforehand, there's often a sort of like 2-year period between first meeting a company and investing in. What happens along that process from your side of things?
We're getting to know that company. We're understanding, their journey, how fast they're moving, what they're, beneath the surface, what is working really well, where they are, where they're strong, and then helping them understand best practice and how they can become strong in the areas that they might not be focusing on or have the skills or experience to sort of develop in. And so we will have numerous conversations with businesses over the from the time we first met them to the time we invest. And there's the point I was mentioning a moment ago where we have a very clear view of best practice and the sort of playbooks that we can use and help companies with. And in that time, we're getting a sense of how companies respond to input and advice, and how much companies want that. We, as a minority investor, we want to work with ambitious, aspirational companies that are looking for help to kind of round out and complete, their business strategy.
Completely. Tell us about your story. You were telling me beforehand you sent your first email in the 1980s.
Yeah, 84, 85 on the system. VAX VMS Web, it was called. So terminals, sort of BT100 terminals. And so I was very lucky out of school. I went to work at BT Labs in Martlesham, which is an amazing environment. There's 4,500 people there on a huge campus.
Whereabouts was this, sorry?
Martlesham in East Anglia, near Ipswich. And my first job was in a gallium arsenide fabrication facility, a fab, and sort of peering down a scanning electron beam microscope, looking at bondings onto gallium arsenide chips. And so that was it was real sci-fi type stuff. And then I worked in submarine optics, and I worked in a group called the Cybernetics Group.
What's submarine optics?
That's undersea cables.
Okay.
So the one I worked on was TAT-8, which is Transatlantic Telecom 8, I think, which was the first one that was all optical. So there's no electronics, and it was optics to optics. So it had a laser amplifier repeater and a laser diode, and it was all done in light. And so we were characterizing and building those devices, and then testing the enclosures and all of the systems that put those onto the ships, and allowed that to go
Very
in
cool.
the UK and America.
And you didn't go to university, right?
I did go to university, but sponsored
Okay.
by VT. Yeah, so they put me through university.
So when did BT put you through them?
That was the early 90s,
Okay. And what did you study?
electronics.
Very good. And this has kind of formed then the bedrock of your career in terms of always looking at digital transformation and innovation.
Yeah, I mean, BT was an amazing place to work, and I worked on a huge array of technologies, and always been very interested in innovation and the ramifications of that, and what that might mean in terms of change and the future. We had a thing, it was 1992, called CamNet, which was effectively Google Glass.
Yeah.
Had a little glass with a little prism in, so you could put something in someone's field of view. You could see what they're seeing. You could instruct them through this little prism, and you could sit someone down in front of some confusing equipment they didn't know, and you could say, take that there and put that there. And so it was an amazing place to work in terms of the ideas. And I think I was on a school trip to Martlesham in 1978. I saw my first video phone.
Yeah.
It had a thing called mirror mode. So if you got out of the shower, you could put it in mirror mode, and it reversed the video so you could comb your hair, and all of those kind of things. That was never a big feature on video phones, and that kind of world never came to pass. And it was really Skype that pioneered all of that. But just seeing those things early, and I think the thing that gave me was knowing that it's not really the idea that's the valuable bit. Or, I mean, that's obviously a prerequisite, but you have to have the stars aligning.
Yeah.
For technologies to pervade and to really have impact and to become mass market phenomena, and I think that's useful.
What's the piece of kind of advice that you find yourself repeating often to portfolio companies or people that are thinking in this space?
I guess a really common theme is you're just investing to upgrade your capability, whether it's people or systems or your advertising partner. We talked about ERP. Our investment period is taking companies from that sort of adolescent stage to that more mature stage, and that involves investing in that in the company. And I think there's whether it's the people or the technology, that you've got to get out of that startup mode and to invest in the people and the equipment appropriate for the next phase.
That's quite an exciting way of sort of thinking about it and saying it, is that the BGF comes in often at the kind of like adolescence scaling up phase. What have been your other sort of lessons that you've learned here over the last 5 years?
I think a very important lesson has been understanding that it's very important to lay out the plans and have a clear idea of what you're going to be doing over the whole period amongst all of the stakeholders as early as possible.
Okay.
And that's happening increasingly with the value creation team, and the sort of the nature of the DD, the due diligence we do now, is very much about surfacing all of the value levers and getting a discussion and a common understanding of what we're going to be doing during our investment. And that allows you to get going immediately, day one. You're not doing everything at once, but you've got that laid out, prioritized plan, and the more complete and the more bought in everyone is to that from the get-go, the better.
So is that part of the sort of due diligence almost process of you will, almost kind of like getting consultancy advice as part of it, right? Like we'll come in and help for 6 months, etc.
I think increasingly what we're doing is making sure that the kind of help and the people who will be working with a company, whether it's me or external companies or individuals or let's say a fractional CTO, all of that stuff is done as early as possible. I think many years ago when tech was not such a big aspect of deals and we were focusing mainly on governance, a chair, sort of CFO or FD, management information, sales, those are the classic things that BT would focus on some years ago. As tech is a sort of a significant part of every business, really, it's not a business that doesn't have tech. As that's more and more an important part of the value add, is making sure that we have all of the people who are going to be helping there lined up as early as possible. I've recently been working on an investment where the fractional CTO of that business met the senior team, was lined up, ready to go, such from day one he was working and starting. And, we're sort of some months in, now a couple of months in, and that's been incredibly effective.
Yeah.
Whereas previously what would happen perhaps is that a technology issue or problem or an area where help was needed would sort of emerge at some point in the investment. Perhaps investor director would come to me and say, we need help with this. And then you get going at that point. So we're much more on the front foot. And that's, that means that you're creating value sooner. And, these sort of value creation interventions that we have, you do that. There's some time required for that to sort of bed in and settle and everyone to have a breather and that to be integrated in the way the business operates before you can do something else significant. And so whereas previously we might have one of those interventions of value creation sort of step ups. Now we can have 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so that approach is sort of what we're doing now.
What other sort of trends do you see that are exciting? Like aside from AI, I mean, I know AI encompasses so much, but what else is there that's out there? AI obviously exploded onto the scene into everyone's consciousness 18 months ago with the launch of ChatGPT. What else is somebody who's immersed in this sort of excites you about the future?
Well, I think the way in which technology and the way we work together and the way we can focus sort of huge amounts of intellectual horsepower on particular problems through the internet and the way we work nowadays is incredibly exciting. I think if you look back, look at the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So you have that the sequencing of the vaccine, the virus's genome was released on an FTP site over the weekend. So Monday morning, that was being fed into the sort of vaccine template or platform that the team had been developing for the previous years, and then the manufacturer of that was lined up, and they got to the point where I think they had a vaccine that was ready for human trials in under 100 days or something. I mean, there's many processes needed before it's actually deployed. But you think of this, the amount of just the amount of intellectual horsepower that's focused on that problem, it was just vast. And that's a function of the way in which we're communicating and data and, and information systems, and the kind of intersection of health and information systems just yields that remarkable result outcome. And you're seeing that across all sorts of human endeavors, like climate science is another area. It looks pretty bleak when you look at kind of global heating, but then there's a huge amount of intellectual horsepower can be focused on those problems. And then you've got things like nuclear fusion and kind of quantum computing. We talked about bioinformatics and kind of personalized vaccines and health programs. And I just think the scope for technology to have incredibly positive benefits it's very exciting. And there's just huge scope for amazing businesses in all of those areas. So it feels like we're accelerating into a sci-fi future, and sort of some of the best reading and prep might be some of the sort of great sci-fi literature.
Any ones you particularly recommend?
Well, I think Blade Runner, do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, is pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where everything's becoming synthetic, you know.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. Is there anything else you'd like to get across?
For companies that are considering BGF, then and sort of listening to this and thinking about, you know, how we can help them and the value add, then get in touch with any of the 15 regional offices that we have, and you know, start the conversation early with our investors.
Are there any unexpected areas in the United Kingdom of sort of digital hotspots? I mean, you know, obviously there's sort of Oxford, Cambridge, London, but any other areas?
Yeah, and inevitably there's a lot going on in London around Silicon Roundabout. But I think the surprising thing is that there's amazing innovation and incredible management teams anywhere. You know, you can be anywhere. You know, the same concept that leads to digital nomads means that you can create an amazing digital business anywhere.
Yeah.
And most businesses we invest in now will have remote aspects to them, you know, people working all over the place. We invested in a business a couple of years ago that didn't even have an office.
Yeah.
I mean, that was sort of peak COVID, but yeah, I think...
Have they gone back to having an office now?
No, they haven't. They've sort of carry on in that pattern. But, you know, the function of cities, which is to bring people together and sort of concentrate, you know, resources and effort, I mean, it's still a factor, but you know, there's amazing innovation all around the country.
Yeah, completely. Simon, thanks very much for coming on. It's been great to hear your
pleasure.
story.
Thank you.